So we talked about crushed plants in swamplands that became peat and then coal. What happened to sea creatures? If sea level went up and down, then must be something about sea creatures as well, right? So now you know where all the oil is being found. There are oil in Canada and the US, in South America. Oops, what did I do here? Laser pointer. So parts of South America and Africa and Middle East, of course, and parts of Eastern Europe, and Russia has a lot of oil, etc., etc. Right? So oil is distributed over the planet less fairly than coal. Coal is everywhere, and everybody can dig up coal, and maybe that's what the lesson was from Mother Nature. You have coal, but you cannot use it. It's too bad for health, and it's too bad for climate. In countries like Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, they don't mind that at all, that they have all the oil. They don't care about fairness. The ground there is full of oil that they sell nearly all of it to other countries for lots and lots of dollars. Imagine, they're just putting a drill into the ground and taking out the oil, and money is pouring in. You don't have to do any work. They use that money to build the highest skyscrapers in the deserts, the most expensive stores, the most modern museums, all in the middle of the desert. And desert means no water. What do? They just take the ocean water and remove the salt from it. It's called desalination, and they drink that water. They grow things with them, and they take showers with them, and so on. They build water parks and swimming pools and so on and so forth. 200 million years ago, there was a big shallow ocean in this region. Water was with fish and lobsters and shrimp and plankton, as we saw before in the last podcast, and of course all of them got crushed because of the movement of the plates and the glaciers and the building of ice and sea level change and so on and so forth that we have been talking about. When they died and the sea creatures sank to the bottom, where they were covered with sand and clay, so they didn't start to rot again because no oxygen. A lot of these microbes that eat the dead plants and animals, they breathe oxygen. If there is no oxygen, there are very few microbes that can eat the organic matter, which is food for somebody, which means that food is going to get preserved like a refrigerator, deep freeze. So this went on for millions of years. The creatures sank deeper and deeper. As with the peat, they were pressed more and more tightly together, and as with the coal, there were basically no carbon left. Sorry, that was completely wrong in the way I said it. As with the peat, they were pressed more and more tightly together, and as with the coal, there was basically only carbon left. All the water and so on was removed, but because there were fewer plants involved, and because the whole mess was deeper and therefore hotter. Remember, as you go deeper and deeper towards the Earth's core, temperatures get warmer and warmer, so warm temperatures made that into oil, liquid form instead of solid coal. Okay, in places where there is oil or coal, natural gas is sometimes found too. Natural gas is actually just methane from the earth. It develops when oil or coal is heated a lot, which happens sometimes because oil and coal are often under kilometers thick of stone layers, where the temperature can easily reach 100 degrees Celsius. Then methane comes out of the remains of the animals and the plants. Like every gas, methane rises because it's light. Most of it seeps through the cracks and the holes in the earth and escapes into the atmosphere. So there are lots of so-called natural seeps of methane under the ocean, on land, and so on and so forth. Okay, remember, methane is a very strong, very powerful greenhouse gas. It is 25 times as powerful as carbon dioxide in trapping the thermal energy. Okay, like every gas, methane rises, most of it seeps through the cracks and holes in the earth and escapes into the atmosphere, but sometimes it hits a layer of earth that it just cannot get through to get out. Then the gas remains trapped in small pockets in the ground, and we go and take it out again. So, scattered all around the world, there are thick layers of carbon in the ground, carbon in solid form like coal, in a liquid form like oil, and in the form of gas such as natural gas, we call it. The carbon comes from animals and plants, many of which have been dead for hundreds of millions of years. If they hadn't ended up in the shallow seas and swamps, they would have been eaten up and rotted away. Then, little by little, all the CO2 would have gone up into the air, but that is not what happened. Beneath our feet, there is a huge supply of carbon that nature built up over millions of years, and we are now digging it all up in a very, very short time, in a few centuries so far, and burning it up and putting all that carbon into the air. So here is a nice big fish swimming around, knowing not what's going to happen. It dies and falls down, and it's not completely rotten. It still has organic matter on it that somebody would eat, but then more stuff falls on top and water comes in and crushes it, so sand and silt on top and remains of the plant animals down here, and it becomes sand, silt, stone on top with oil and natural gas below that, and we just put a big drill and drill hundreds of meters, kilometers deep, and just suck it out like Coca-Cola. Oil is money, and money is just everything you need in life. So Middle Eastern countries which were deserts and would have just been miserable with no water, but now they have all this oil and they have all this money. They can build skyscrapers, water parks, they can have all the water by desalinating the seawater and so on. Okay, so we'll come back and talk about what happened with the number of people along the way, and that's important as well. But you have to be careful, because let's say you are listening to this podcast and you are from a rich family. I'm just saying, maybe you are from a poor family. So do you think you are consuming more material, eating more better food, traveling more by car or plane? Are you buying more things like video games and computers and so on than somebody who's poorer than you? Which means, are you emitting more CO2 than somebody who's poorer? Right? So these things matter, because it's not just the number of people, it is how much each person is eating, using energy, wasting food, wasting water, buying things, wasting things. Are you buying a new iPhone every year even though you don't need it? And so on. So how much each person is consuming makes a difference as well. So when you talk about population and population increase and greenhouse gas increase, always remember how much we actually consume, how much carbon and greenhouse gases we emit also matters, not just the number of people, because there are poor people which are not who are not emitting much carbon dioxide as well as not emitting much carbon dioxide at all, and there are some who are emitting a lot. So we have to worry about those things as well. So we'll come back and discuss the population growth. But as population increases, you know what we do, rich or poor? We occupy more and more space. We are taking away space from tigers and elephants and lions, and we are building houses and cutting down trees, and we are building cities and making it hard for the birds to live, and so on and so forth, right? So it's not just climate change, we are also changing the habitat. We're changing the types of trees, number of trees, biodiversity as we call it. You may have heard of it as well. So population does put pressure on the planet in terms of the space we occupy. So even though we consume less as poor people, we are still consuming, and more people means we will consume more. But the key question is, if we reduce population, will we reduce the emissions? Not necessarily, unless we reduce consumption of carbon dependent energy, food and clothes and computers and video games and so on. Cars, planes, automobiles, trains, right? So it's a complicated question. If you're too young, don't worry about it, but just remember that population growth is a problem, but there are other issues as well. Now population is not growing as fast. In many places it's in fact decreasing, because not all the women now want to get married and have children. Okay, so all these issues are important. We cannot just say population is increasing and it's bad for climate change. So when we come back, we'll talk about population, but you just remember the important things about population. Okay, we'll see you in the next podcast to talk about population.